Today, Hollywood leads the world in the making of gown creations. You see, we have so many marvelous movie stars who need so many clothes and costumes that it's brought all the finest designers from all parts of the world to Hollywood.
She was sort of a huge star, huge vaudeville star, kind of a Madonna of her day. She had been involved in this kind of shenanigan faux engagement with this female impersonator, Julian Eltinge.
Become more feminine, or
I think so.
woman?
Once the wig gets on your head and you have, of course, the falsies and the bra, you don't take on a part of a real woman. But I think what happens with the transformation is there, and that's where the art form comes in.
Wait, Hollywood's golden age wasn't just about glitz, glamour, and flawless smiles. It was also built on secrets so big they could have shattered entire careers. Imagine the icons you grew up seeing as the very definition of femininity. The screen sirens who made headlines for their beauty, charm, and scandalous love lives.
There'll probably be no place like that again.
And it just went on.
But some of them weren't born the way the world believed. These 8 stars of old Hollywood were hiding the same secret. They were born male. And the studios would have done anything to keep you from finding out. But let's find out in this video. Before RuPaul, before drag queens had TV shows and mainstream fame, there was one man who shocked audiences by convincing an entire generation he was one of Hollywood's most glamorous women. That man was Julian Eltinge, born William Julian Dalton in 1881. And let's just say, if you think celebrity secrets today are wild, his story was pure dynamite in the tightly controlled, morally obsessed early 20th century. Eltinge wasn't just dressing up. He was a master of transformation. From the moment he first stepped on stage in Boston as a teenager, audiences didn't just laugh or clap, they believed. His illusion of femininity was so flawless that people swore he had to be a woman. And here's the kicker, he leaned into that deception. For years, the big reveal at the end of his act was him whipping off his wig and showing the shocked crowd that the gorgeous woman they'd just been swooning over.
You now by remote control, that famous artist, Mr. Julian Eltinge, female impersonator,
was actually a man. By the time he hit Broadway in 1904, Julian was already a rising star. Within a few years, he wasn't just performing in vaudeville theaters across the U.S. He was giving a command performance before King Edward VII. Imagine that, a monarch applauding a man dressed as a glamorous woman, at a time when cross-dressing in public could literally get you arrested. And the money? Astronomical. Eltinge became one of the highest paid performers of his era, raking in salaries that would make even modern A-listers jealous. His shows, like The Fascinating Widow and Cousin Lucy, were so successful that a Broadway theater was named after him, the Eltinge Theater, an honor usually reserved for the most powerful stars of the stage.
Gentlemen, well, here I am back in Hollywood making my first talking picture. I have had several ladies on the set and ladies around the different studios ask me this year as to who is making my cut.
But Julian's fame came with a dangerous catch. America in the early 1900s wasn't exactly LGBTQ friendly. Rumors about his sexuality swirled constantly, and critics even labeled him ambisextrous, a sly way of suggesting he was both masculine and feminine. Without daring to use the word gay to fight back, Eltinge lived a bizarre double life. On stage, he was glamorous, delicate, and almost impossibly feminine. Off stage, he went out of his way to prove he was a real man. He smoked cigars, picked fights, bragged about barroom brawls, and even posed for publicity shots flexing his muscles. It was all a carefully staged performance, Hollywood's first case of weaponized masculinity to cover a scandal.
There was a little girl who had a little curl right in the middle of her forehead.
Even with all this, his private life remained shrouded in mystery. Some colleagues swore he was gay. Milton Berle himself said so. Others, like actress Ruth Gordon, insisted he was as virile as anybody virile. The truth? No confirmed lovers, male or female, were ever publicly known. Hollywood's silence machine worked overtime to keep him untouchable. His star burned bright, but the times eventually caught up with him. The Great Depression gutted vaudeville, silent films gave way to talkies, and Julian's style of performance suddenly seemed old-fashioned. Once the toast of 2 continents, he found himself reduced to nightclub shows and struggling to maintain the lavish life he had built. He died in 1941, just 10 days after one of his final performances, alone, in a Manhattan apartment, his glory days long behind him. Still, Julian Eltinge remains a cultural bombshell of the Golden Age. He wasn't just a performer. He was a walking, breathing scandal, managing to fool millions while navigating a world that demanded he be both the most convincing woman on stage and the most exaggerated man off it. His entire life was the ultimate balancing act between truth and illusion. And if you thought Julian's story was shocking, wait until you see who's next. The next Golden Age star didn't just perform femininity. Her entire public identity was built on a secret Hollywood would have killed to bury. If Julian Eltinge was Hollywood's perfect lady in disguise, then Bert Savoy was the queen who ripped the disguise to shreds and danced on it in heels. Born Everett Mackenzie around 1876, Savoy wasn't interested in illusion. He didn't want anyone to believe he was really a woman. That game was too small. Instead, he mocked femininity with oversized wigs, gaudy gowns, and a campy strut that made the whole idea of gender performance look ridiculous. Where Eltinge whispered glamour, Savoy screamed parody. Where Eltinge gave audiences the fantasy of the perfect woman, Savoy gave them a caricature, and they couldn't get enough.
You hope that God is a drag queen? You know, we'll have so many things to talk about, like hair and makeup and fashion and cleavage. Well, thank you and good evening.
His act was camp decades before camp became a word in the cultural dictionary. He spoke in a brassy falsetto, snapping off lines so sassy that audiences repeated them like slang. You slay me? That's Bert Savoy. You don't know the half of it? Also Bert. He was a soundbite machine, tossing off phrases that filtered from vaudeville stages into everyday American speech. Think about that. The language of a drag queen slipped into mainstream vocabulary in the buttoned-up 1910s and 20s. Savoy wasn't a lone force either. He had his partner Jay Brennan, and together they stormed Broadway in shows like Miss 1917, the Ziegfeld Follies of 1918, and the Greenwich Village Follies of 1920 and 1922. Their routines dripped with innuendo. Their humor poked holes in respectability politics. In a world obsessed with real men and proper ladies, Savoy strutted out in sequins and said, "Honey, I'll wear what I want, how I want, and you'll pay good money to watch an America Did." The irony? While newspapers condemned female impersonators in moralizing editorials, those same critics were sneaking into the theater to laugh at Savoy's act. He was living proof of a cultural hypocrisy. Queerness was dangerous, but only until it was profitable. But here's the spicy twist. Savoy didn't just influence audiences. He rewired icons. Mae West, the ultimate Hollywood sex bomb, admitted she built her persona on his act. That exaggerated wiggle in her walk, those purring double entendres, the so bad it's good delivery, straight out of Savoy's playbook. West took drag queen bravado, filtered it through blonde curls, and turned it into mainstream stardom. In other words, one of Hollywood's most scandalous women was channeling a man in drag the whole time.
And you can see what I have to fight. On Gower Street, where doormen leap, and Western actors their Virgil keep, and taxi drivers do nothing but sleep, I pass by every night.
Savoy's career was bold. His death, even bolder. In 1923, while riding a wave of fame, he went for a stroll on Long Beach in New York. A storm rolled in, lightning cracked the sky, and struck him dead on the spot. Witnesses swore that just after a deafening thunderclap, Savoy tossed off one last line. "Mercy, ain't Miss God cutting up something awful?" Imagine it. Camp until the very end, his exit as theatrical as his life. Even in death, he refused to be forgotten. The painter Charles Demuth immortalized him in Calla Lilies, Bert Savoy, a coded queer tribute. To the untrained eye, it was just flowers and seashells. But to those in the know, it was a shrine. The lilies hinting at sexuality, the seashells whispering queerness, the storm symbolizing the lightning bolt that took him down. It was art that hid in plain sight, just like Savoy's whole career. But here's the controversy history tries to soften. Savoy was dangerous because he didn't pass. He wasn't hiding queerness, he flaunted it. In an America desperate to shove anything queer back into the shadows, Savoy strutted on stage and turned repression into a punchline. He was a queer rebel before the word even had political weight. To some, he was vulgar, a joke too far. To others, he was liberation in heels. That's why his legacy lingers. Eltinge represented secrecy, queerness packaged as illusion. Savoy represented exposure, queerness loud, brash, undeniable. He mocked femininity, celebrated femininity, and broke every rule about gender while making the whole room laugh at it. His existence was a reminder that gender wasn't sacred. It was material. And if Bert Savoy could make America laugh at its own hypocrisy, what would come next would make them gasp. The next Golden Age star didn't just camp it up. He blurred reality and illusion until it ended in scandal, surgery, and even crime. If you thought Julian Eltinge was mysterious and Bert Savoy was flamboyant, then buckle up, because Ray Bourbon was the Golden Age's ultimate wildcard, a drag legend who lived somewhere between performance, delusion, and outright crime. Born Hallie Borde Waddell in 1902, or maybe 1892, depending on which of Ray's lies you believe, Bourbon spent an entire lifetime turning truth into theater and scandal into survival.
See what I have to fight. On Gower Street where doormen leap, and Western actors their Virgil keep, and taxi drivers do nothing but sleep, I pass by every night. Oh, once I was famous.
Bourbon first made waves in the 1930s, headlining San Francisco's notorious pansy show Boys Will Be Girls. But Ray wasn't like the polished Elton or the campy Savoy. No, Bourbon went for the jugular dirty jokes, filthy punchlines, and gender-bending routines so risque that mainstream theaters slammed the door. Critics sneered, calling him a professional vulgarian. Ray didn't deny it. He built his empire on shock value. By the 1940s, Bourbon was everywhere, touring clubs, selling comedy records, and sharing the Broadway spotlight with none other than Mae West in Catherine Was Great and Diamond Lil. But while West's brand of sexuality was cheeky, Bourbon's was radioactive. He wasn't just hinting at taboos, he was rubbing America's face in them, spitting one-liners about sex, politics, and drag long before it was even remotely acceptable. And offstage, Ray blurred the line between act and life in ways that kept everyone guessing. Arrested in 1956 in New Orleans, Bourbon strutted into court in a dress, high heels, perfume, and false lashes. 5 o'clock shadow be damned. To shock the judge, he whipped out what he called a sex change certificate from Mexico. Real? Probably not. Most historians think he had surgery for cancer and rebranded it into a headline-grabbing transition. But Ray ran with the story, renamed himself Ray Bourbon, and even recorded an album called Let Me Tell You About My Operation. Was it all theater? Or was Bourbon living a truth the world didn't yet have language for? Nobody could pin him down. Was he a female impersonator, a trans pioneer, or just a con artist milking the scandal? The answer depended on who you asked, and Ray was never interested in clarifying.
Oh, I'm Tessie the messy old extra, calling every studio each day, fixing my face with hope just in case and shouting my voice away.
Because Bourbon loved nothing more than a tall tale. He claimed he was the illegitimate son of a Texas congressman. He claimed royal blood as the last heir to the Bourbon dynasty. He bragged about starring alongside Rudolph Valentino in Blood and Sand. Every story was juicier than the last, and almost none of them held up. But that was the point. With Ray, you never knew what was real. And maybe that was the genius of it. But the curtain didn't fall with glamour. It fell with blood. By the 1960s, Ray was broke, washed up, and clinging to the scraps of fame. He drove from dive to dive in a beaten-down car, dragging behind him a trailer full of, no joke, 70 dogs. Those dogs were his world. When he left them at a kennel and couldn't pay, the owner allegedly had them killed. Ray was devastated, furious, and vengeful. He hired 2 men to rough the kennel owner up, but the job went wrong. The man was shot dead. Bourbon insisted he never wanted murder, but the damage was done. In 1968, the once dazzling diva of drag was convicted as an accomplice and sentenced to 99 years in prison. And that's where the legend ended. Not with applause, not with a scandalous reveal, but with Bourbon rotting in a Texas prison cell. He died there in 1971, leaving behind a legacy of wigs, lies, broken careers, and whispers too salacious for Hollywood to ever claim.
And men have gotten a bit thin. It's a shame to suppose that I show it. Oh, the failure I've been in the past 20 years. Every producer I phone must have wool in his ears.
Even now, Bourbon's life raises uncomfortable questions. Was he a fearless trailblazer pushing drag into dangerous territory? Or was he a fraud who exploited gender, illusion, and even crime just to stay in the spotlight? Maybe he was both. What's certain is this: Ray Bourbon didn't just blur lines, he obliterated them. He lived like a weapon, aiming his chaos at anyone who dared to look, and for better or worse, nobody could ever look away. Few names shook Broadway Paris and the Moulin Rouge the way Barbette did. Born Vander Clyde Broadway in Round Rock, Texas, In 1904, he was just a farm boy with big city dreams. But he didn't just leave the farm. He burned it behind him. Instead of settling into a safe circus act, Vander became Barbette, a glittering, sequined enigma who flew across the stage as a woman until the wig came off. That reveal was electric. One tug of a hairpin and the fantasy shattered. Night after night, audiences gasped as the goddess of the air became a man before their eyes. Some cheered, some laughed nervously, some felt duped, but no one left unmoved. The act wasn't just performance, it was a provocation. What if beauty wasn't feminine? What if masculinity wasn't what you thought it was? What if desire itself could be tricked into blushing? And Paris went mad for it. Jean Cocteau wrote dreamily about Barbette, comparing him to a tragic angel. Man Ray shot photos of him drenched in shadows and silk. Picasso whispered about him at dinner parties. To the avant-garde, Barbette wasn't just a circus act. He was living art, a creature that made gender itself look flimsy. For intellectuals, he was a muse. For tourists, a thrill. For the powerful men who paid to keep his company, he was temptation in sequins. Because here's the part history books smooth over. Barbette's life off stage was just as slippery as his act. Gossip swirled about aristocrats, critics, and even married politicians who pursued him, knowing full well what lay beneath the gowns. In the smoky corners of Parisian cabarets, Barbette was seen sipping champagne in full drag long after the curtain fell. Was he living as himself or living a double life? No one dared print the truth in Texas papers, but in Paris, the whispers never stopped. Back home, he was a scandal waiting to be censored. America in the 1920s loved a spectacle, but hated ambiguity. A man in a dress who could seduce an audience? That was a nightmare. Even when U.S. papers praised his act, they couldn't decide what to call him, a genius or a perversion. And then fate struck cruelly. In 1929, a trapeze accident left Barbette broken. He fought through polio, pneumonia, and relentless pain, but the golden boy of the Moulin Rouge was never the same. Still, he refused to disappear. Hollywood called not to put him on screen, but to drain his magic. He taught actresses like Marlene Dietrich and Claudette Colbert how to move, how to seduce with the smallest gesture. The irony? The same studios that sneered at his freak act quietly begged for his secrets to polish their stars. He had become invisible, the ghost behind the glamour. But the scandals didn't stop. After his decline, his beloved gowns, wigs, and stage treasures mysteriously vanished, stolen, some say, by a bitter ex-lover who sold them off piece by piece. What survived of his career is fragmented, as if someone wanted to erase the man who blurred too many lines. Family members back in Texas tried to sanitize him, calling him simply a brilliant circus artist. But queer historians saw through the whitewash. Barbette wasn't just a trapeze artist, he was one of the first to weaponize gender itself as art. And then came the darkest chapter. In 1973, Vander Clyde Broadway was found dead in his bed. The official report? Suicide, the final toll of decades of illness and agony. But even in death, suspicion clung to him. Old Parisian gossip resurfaced. Was it despair? Was it revenge? Some whispered of jealous lovers, others of secrets too explosive for his quiet Texas retirement. A man who lived by illusion, undone by a mystery death? Was that coincidence, or was it his last act? Barbette wasn't just an acrobat. He was a cultural grenade. A man in silks who shattered everything polite society thought it knew about gender, beauty, and desire. To some, he was a fraud. To others, a genius. To many, a dangerous seduction. He didn't just swing from a trapeze. He swung the world upside down and left it gasping. If old Hollywood loved a scandal, vaudeville downright feasted on it. Enter Karyl Norman, born George Francis Peduzzi in 1897, who transformed himself into one of the most notorious gender-bending entertainers of the jazz age. His stage name, Karyl Norman, was neither masculine nor feminine, but something in between. And that ambiguity was the scandal. Was he a man, a woman, something else entirely? Audiences couldn't decide, and Norman made sure they never got a straight answer. Dubbed the Creole fashion plate, a name dripping with exoticism and sexual mystery, Norman wasn't about subtlety. He was glamour weaponized, sequined gowns, feathered headpieces, and a carefully painted face that seemed to mock and outshine the women of the day. On stage, he could slip into a sultry soprano one moment, then drop into a booming baritone the next, deliberately shocking the crowd. It was a tease, a trick, and a dare. A man showing he could play femininity better than the women themselves. And America was obsessed. By the 1920s, Norman was headlining at the Palace Theatre, tearing up the Greenwich Village Follies, and touring internationally from Britain to Australia. Packed houses screamed for him, critics gushed over the novelty, and gossip columnists hinted that more than a few society men were dazzled, and maybe even confused, by his allure. The line between admiration and desire was blurry, and that was exactly the controversy. But Norman's act wasn't just glamour, it was subversion. While other impersonators tried to pass as real women, Norman flaunted the in-between. His quick changes, his slippery vocal tricks, his Creole persona, they were all part of a show that made audiences laugh, swoon, and squirm. Some adored him as an entertainer. Others whispered he was corrupting morals, a dangerous tease who blurred gender at a time when even dancing too close could get you arrested. And arrested he nearly was, several times. Police harassment followed him, especially during the height of the pansy craze in the late 1920s and early 30s, when drag and camp acts took over New York nightlife. Conservative watchdogs wanted him shut down, accusing him of indecency and immoral performance. Behind the curtains, rival performers spread rumors that Norman lived as a woman off stage, that he fooled not just audiences but his lovers, that high society men paid for private shows where the costumes were even more scandalous. Nothing was ever proven, which only made the gossip worse. And then came the fade. Like many of his peers, Jean Malin, Ray Bourbon, Norman's fame dimmed as the political climate shifted. By the mid-1930s, the crackdown on queer nightlife was brutal. The pansy craze was over, and Norman went from headlining stages to scraping by on nostalgia acts. Once a dazzling symbol of gender-bending glamour, he became a shadowy figure, still working but never quite reclaiming the fire of his heyday. The irony? Karyl Norman outlasted most of his contemporaries, performing well into the 1950s, but he did so under a cloud of scandal that never fully lifted. Was he a genius entertainer who played with gender like a deck of cards? Or a dangerous provocateur who blurred the lines too far? Audiences never stopped debating it. Karyl Norman didn't just wear gowns. He weaponized femininity, seduced audiences with ambiguity, and left America blushing, laughing, and suspicious all at once. He was glamour, he was scandal, and most of all, he was proof that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do on stage is be exactly what they fear you might be. If today's drag queens owe anyone their crown, it's Jean Malin. Born Victor Eugene James Malinowski in Brooklyn in 1908, Malin was a contradiction wrapped in sequins and swagger. He wasn't a frail, delicate pansy playing at femininity. He was 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, a bruiser who weighed in at 200 pounds. And he made damn sure you knew that queerness didn't mean weakness.
Tight, but you're all right.
Say, you can be had.
While others survived in shadows, Malin lit himself on fire. In the speakeasies of Prohibition-era Manhattan, he became a sensation of the pansy craze, strutting on stage in tuxedos, lisping, swishing, and tossing razor-sharp comebacks at anyone bold enough to heckle. His act was less about impersonation and more about confrontation. He wasn't hiding behind a gown. He was saying, "Yes, I'm queer. Laugh at me, and I'll laugh louder. Or knock you flat." And knock them flat, he did. Malin's reputation as a fighter was just as legendary as his stage banter. When hecklers tried to humiliate him, he reportedly hurled men twice his size out of nightclubs. One columnist even remarked, "All that twitters isn't pansy." For a gay man in 1930, being both openly flamboyant and physically intimidating was revolutionary. He was glamour and danger rolled into one, a paradox that audiences couldn't resist. At his peak, Malin was one of the highest-paid nightclub entertainers of 1930, rubbing elbows with Broadway's elite and sipping cocktails with Hollywood starlets. He was seen escorting actress Polly Moran, hobnobbing with Ginger Rogers, and throwing the kind of parties that left insiders buzzing. But his fame came with suspicion. Straight Hollywood adored his wit on stage, but when RKO cast him in Arizona to Broadway, 1933, his flamboyance rattled the suits. Studio boss David O. Selznick reportedly demanded Malin be banned from the lot. Hollywood, it turned out, loved queerness in the shadows of speakeasies, but wanted no trace of it on screen.
How do you get that way? You can't get away with this. Come on, sugar. Everybody likes.
Then came the scandal no one saw coming. Despite living openly gay, Malin stunned fans when he married Ziegfeld showgirl Lucille Hyman in 1931. The marriage barely lasted, sparking endless rumors. Was it a publicity stunt? A cover arranged by the studio? Or some messy entanglement of lust, liquor, and business? Lucille's later downfall only added to the whispers. She was eventually arrested for running high-class Manhattan brothels. From drag darling to gangster-adjacent widow, the tabloids couldn't believe their luck. But the biggest scandal was Malin's death. On August 10, 1933, just hours after his farewell performance at Venice's Ship Cafe, Malin climbed into a sedan with actress Patsy Kelly and his close friend, Jimmy Forlenza. Moments later, he jammed the car into reverse, plunging off the pier into the Pacific. Malin was crushed under the steering wheel, dead at 25. Kelly and Forlenza survived, shaken but alive. Officially, it was ruled an accident, but Hollywood whispered. Some said he'd been drinking. Others suggested foul play, that Malin had powerful enemies who wanted him silenced, especially after mocking Hollywood's closet and flaunting his sexuality in public. A darker theory claimed the crash was no accident at all, but a desperate act from a man who realized that the world would never truly let him shine. To this day, nobody knows for sure. What we do know is this: Jean Malin wasn't just a pansy. He was dangerous, dazzling, and too much for 1930s America to handle. He blurred gender, punched through prejudice, and carved out a spotlight that burned twice as bright and half as long. He wasn't born male or female on stage. He was born too much, and the world never forgave him for it. Before the internet made drag queens into influencers, Frances Renault, born Antonio Oriema in 1893, was already living like a scandal waiting to happen. A female mimic by trade, Frances didn't just throw on a wig for cheap laughs. He lived and breathed glamour, dazzling vaudeville audiences in feathered headpieces, diamond chokers, and gowns so extravagant they looked stolen off Broadway starlets. One reviewer even admitted, Frances Renault is the woman Lillian Russell wishes she could be.
Everything was loud and everything was jumping, and we had a good time. The neighborhood was called Bronzeville at the time. It was not just a look.
But what made Renault infamous wasn't just the illusion, it was the nerve. In 1913, Atlanta police tried to ban him under strict cross-dressing laws. That should have been the end of the act. Instead, Francis did something unthinkable. He took the city to court. The idea of a painted, wigged, corseted man standing before a Southern judge was shocking enough, but Renault wasn't asking for tolerance. He was demanding legitimacy. Whispers swirled that he even showed up to the courthouse in drag, daring the system to either jail him or let him sparkle. That courtroom stunt branded him dangerous. The conservative press called him a menace to morality, a pervert corrupting American theater. Preachers thundered against him in Sunday sermons. But in the shadows, his name became electric. Wealthy men, politicians, and bored socialites snuck into his shows just to see the boy who looked better than a chorus girl. And the whispers got darker. Some claimed Renault had private dinners with his most devoted fans, married men who didn't dare be seen in public with him, but couldn't stay away either. The idea of a painted, wigged, corseted man standing before a Southern judge was shocking enough, but Renault wasn't asking for tolerance. He was demanding legitimacy. Whispers swirled that he even showed up to the courthouse in drag, daring the system to either jail him or let him sparkle. That courtroom stunt branded him dangerous. The conservative press called him a menace to morality, a pervert corrupting American theater. Preachers thundered against him in Sunday sermons. But in the shadows, his name became electric. Wealthy men, politicians, and bored socialites snuck into his shows just to see the boy who looked better than a chorus girl. And the whispers got darker. Some claimed Renault had private dinners with his most devoted fans, married men who didn't dare be seen in public with him, but couldn't stay away either. Actresses hated him too. Some accused him of stealing their femininity, mocking their craft by imitating it too perfectly. Others were more jealous than angry, muttering that Renault was getting bigger paychecks and bigger audiences than real women, because audiences weren't just watching a performance, they were watching a scandal unfold in real time. And the scandals never stopped. There were rumors of late-night police raids in other cities, of clubs forced to shut down after moral crusaders protested his act. At least once, a fellow performer accused him of living as a woman off stage, hinting that maybe Renault wasn't just pretending, maybe he was living a double life. He never confirmed, never denied, and that silence kept the controversy alive. By the 1930s, the glamour had begun to fade, but Renault remained a ghostly figure in vaudeville lore, elusive, untouchable, and always a little suspicious. He never married, never explained his private life, and left no public legacy besides sequins, gossip, and courtroom records. When he died in 1955, obituaries barely scratched the surface. No heirs, no confessions, no closure. Just the memory of a man who blurred the lines of gender so convincingly that even the law couldn't decide what to do with him. Francis Renault wasn't just an entertainer. He was a walking controversy, a man who dared to put on a dress in a time when that was a crime, who turned femininity into both rebellion and seduction, and who left behind the nagging suspicion that maybe the act wasn't just an act. By the time Charles Pierce hit the stage, drag wasn't just frowned upon, it was criminal. In the 1950s, police raided clubs, hauled men off in handcuffs, and destroyed careers over a pair of stockings. But Pierce didn't care. Born Charles himself, a man undeniably, he built an entire career out of walking onto a stage in a gown and heels, then daring the world to laugh, not at him, but at the very women Hollywood worshipped. And he refused to call himself a drag queen. That was too cheap, too nightclub. Female impersonator, too obvious. Instead, Pierce demanded to be known as a male actress. It was both a provocation and a warning. He wasn't there to trick you into believing he was a woman. He wanted you to see the man beneath the wig and then watch him tear apart Hollywood's feminine royalty, piece by piece.
Checked. The female impersonators, some of them today that will do a half hour of a Diana Ross record just to be glamorous. That's just living jukebox. See,
I don't
when
find
I go to a
that.
nightclub, I want to laugh.
His acts weren't just impersonations, they were assassinations. When he became Bette Davis or Joan Crawford, it wasn't about illusion, it was about ripping their carefully constructed glamour to shreds with claws sharpened by wit. He mimicked the wobble in Mae West's hips, the icy squint of Davis, the melodramatic shriek of Crawford, but he exaggerated them until they collapsed under the weight of their own artifice. Audiences roared, but Hollywood royalty wasn't always in on the joke. Word spread that Elizabeth Taylor herself was furious at how Pierce twisted her image into a caricature. Joan Crawford's loyalists? Outraged. In fact, by the 1980s, his biting material was causing walk. But Pierce never flinched. He didn't soften his claws, he didn't tone down his material, and he didn't apologize for being both male and feminine on stage. If anything, he leaned into the contradiction, flaunting the tension between the man he was and the women he embodied. That tension, that scandal, was his art, and it made Charles Pierce one of the most infamous and dangerous gender-bending performers Hollywood has ever known. And there you have it, 8 Golden Age stars who weren't what Hollywood sold us. Behind the gowns and glamour were secrets the studios fought to bury. If this is what they hid, then imagine what Tinseltown is still hiding now. That's it for today. See you in the next video. Until then, goodbye.